You're very welcome along to the Sunday paper review here on all your social channels regarding Off the Ball, facebook.com/Off the Ball and on YouTube. But you know that if you're watching by now, it's Richie McCormick here with you today, and I'm joined by the news editor from the Journal.ie, Sinead Carroll, and also sports journalist with the Irish Daily Mail, Philip Lanigan, making your paper review debut today, I believe, sir.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Congratulations. We have the cake and the streamers en route for you this afternoon.
Great.
If you once
a very important minor match to be
here.
Yeah,
just getting text updates for my son has just lost his minor championship semi-final. So
what's the club?
Ratholt. So the seniors are playing the championship semi-final at 3 o'clock, so we'll be going from there and then on to train the under-15s or help train the under-15s about 6:15. So this is a nice little...
It's a proper Sunday now.
This is a nice little break to the day's hurling.
Just to recap, you've missed the Suns match.
Yes.
Yet you're giving your time to everybody else. Now, I don't want to land you in trouble here in your first...
I'm already in trouble.
Yeah, okay. So this is your first and only time that you're going to be doing the pay-per-view this evening. You're going to be kept at home for the remaining few Saturdays. Pay-per-view, of course, brought to you with thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products. We'll bring you through the back pages and indeed the headlines on those. On the back page of Philip's own Sunday Mail, flying low, Leicester cruise a victory over Edinburgh's winger James helps maintain strong Pro 14 start. We see James Lowe going over for his second try, or Leinster's second try of the afternoon yesterday. Liverpool march on is what they go with on the Sunday Independent. A big picture of Mo Salah following his tap-in against Southampton yesterday. And European Tour blow as McIlroy turns focus to the US, the blow to the European Tour a week out from the Golf National. Fergie's back on the front page of the Sunday Times today, arms aloft after his surgery and health problems late last year. Alex Ferguson paying first visit to Old Trafford for that 1-1 draw for Manchester United yesterday with Wolves. It's been a long journey. It's great to be here, said Sir Alex yesterday. Now, on the back page as well of the Star Sports Sunday is Ferguson. Fair way to go. Return of legend Sir Alex can't inspire United as Jose rages at his stars. It's shock and awe. Sergio amazes Pep, but Klopp's on top as celebratory. Pep Guardiola and Sergio Aguero and indeed Mo Salah there. Thrown to the Wolves, Jose Flores flop stars. Jose Mourinho blasted his players' attitude, claiming they lacked Wolves' hunger yesterday in that 1-1 draw. And also we see on the bottom left there a picture of a delighted Anthony Joshua after his knockout of Alexander Povetkin last night to retain his WBA, WBO and IBF crowns. Obviously enough. It doesn't feature too hugely in the papers today given the timing of the win, but a huge one for Joshua. We'll have more on that on the main show today. Sorry sir, no Fergie time winner for United on Sir Alex's return after Moutinho's equaliser poops Old Trafford party, and they came close to winning it late on as well, did Wolves. On the back page of the Sunday Worlds today, the joy of six, Reg's perfect start goes on, that 3-0 victory over Southampton dominating for them today. And on the Sunday People, Red Raw, fuming Jose moans, I don't like my team. Red Roar, Old Trafford welcomes fit again Fergie. And we should note as well, the Sunday People, one of the two papers today to go with R.I.P. Chaz, a huge Spurs supporter, Chaz and Dave, and the definition of an underrated musician. Chaz Hodges, who passed away there yesterday. And on the Sunday Mirror as well, De Jong that I want, City boss ready to battle for Ajax wonder kids. They want Frankie De Jong from Ajax to boost their midfield as the season progresses. And dunces with Wolves is probably the headline of the day, to be fair. Mourinho, we deserve to be punished, but at least Fergie looked in good health. True enough. There is one place that we have to begin. I don't know how much fatigue there is surrounding this story. Philip, perhaps it's more pronounced for you, given that you have to write about it for today's Irish Daily Mail on Sunday. We begin with the green and red of Mayo.
Yeah, just the piece, the angle I was looking at was just, this seems a case of history repeating itself. Like the Cork route, to me, like I played a little bit of hurling in DCU with Sean O'Halpin, and Sean Og is one of the most positive people you could meet. He's like a light bulb. He's just so charismatic. Got this view that if anybody who knows him, you throw him into a dressing room, he was like a god in DCU. And you look back at what happened with Cork and what kind of it reduced guys to, and how public it was played. And if you take his status now, he's almost an outsider in Cork. He said it himself. He should have been part of the success story, the underage camp, the development squads, but he's not. You've guys like Donald Cusa coaching in Clare. So the splits of what happened in Cork a decade, 15 years on, are still there, being played out publicly.
16 years, it's remarkable,
16 years, and you look, I got flashbacks of the Cork press conference, looking at the ladies' press conference and thinking, how have the lessons not been learned along the way? The GPA, the women's GPA and the men's GPA, they sit in the same office. And I asked Seamus Hickey, on Tuesday at the ESRI report, do you not have conversation, or have they asked for advice? And he said, well, Jim Begley, they're in the same room, so of course we have conversations. And to me, you had such a public, painful example of players' rights issues that was played out, which led to a death threat to Gerald McCarthy, that surely you look at that and you go, why are we going through the same awful, painful process, which is clearly, I would say, the legacy of what's happening in Mayo is going to last 10 years.
Yeah, when you figured that the players involved in the walkout were among senior players, whether it be Sarah Tierney or Cora Staunton, and on we could go, like, you would have figured that they would have been pillars of the Mayo ladies setup for years to come. You would have figured, at least on the outside looking in. Clearly the events of the last 4 or 5 months or so have changed that radically, and that's not necessarily going to be the case going forward.
Yeah, and the repercussions, I'm sure, will be felt at club level as well for a long time to come. And I think that analogy probably shows some of the other problems with the entire setup, that we have a separate ladies football association, you have a separate camogie association. So even if there were learnings amongst the GAA people, often that they won't cross over to that. They're completely lost. And the fact that we've got to this point, and you were mentioning, Richie, about fatigue there, I think everyone is fatigued by this story, but also still intrigued, because you're seeing into a family structure, really. You're kind of witnessing a lot of airing of dirty laundry, which is kind of the stories that people stay interested in until you kind of get to the bottom of it. I think with this, you're never going to get to the bottom of it, because there's, I think it was Micheál Clifford in your paper was saying, there's a lot of people who will think they're right when they're not right, and a lot of people who think a lot of people looking inward will say they're wrong when they're not that wrong. So I think we'll never actually be able to give the proper judgment on it.
Well, from what you're saying as well, Sinead, the key difference, or what's almost worse to Cork, is that the divide is now club, so it's not even county. So here you now have a massive split between the preeminent club team. So it's not even that it can kind of be kept in a county bubble. Now that this is now club, county, basically every level of senior ladies, which is awful. And Dennis Walsh has a very interesting piece, fairly one-sided in terms of how it documents it, where maybe the blame lies, and takes a few strips off Peter Leahy as well.
Are you surprised at how one-sided the piece was?
A bit, because it's very much documents what went on at the press conference, which clearly laid there were serious issues that the players felt, and the breakdown relationship between the captain and Peter wasn't going to work. But just the side piece, again, very interesting. But when you're into documenting Peter Leahy and his obviously a brush with cancer and his personal details, where you're talking about previous case of charges of fraud, and how it documents how in prison he pursued qualifications as a fitness trainer operator. You're into the personal side of things, of showing a history, and what does that imply? So if you were to apply the same things now, do you go back to the Carnacon 8 and all the people, and do you go through their personal lives and say, look, did anything happen in their personal lives, or does that influence how they appear at the press conference? So while Peter's case is public and he's talked about it, there is that thing of, well, at what point do you stop, and what, by throwing up his past history going back to 2005, what is that meant to imply, and what happens if you did the same with any and every, or the players? Is that the next chapter now, that we're going to get into the personal lives of all the players and see what's going on in their private lives, maybe?
I think one of the things that is missing from this piece, so it's subheaded with the mass walkout paints a picture of dysfunction and a deeply unsatisfactory environment. That's coming from the press conference of the 12 disaffected players and the 12 who departed. There's 20-something who stayed, who have a much different story. They say that they were happy with management, they were happy with the style of management, as well as what was happening on the pitch and in the dressing room. So I think that has to be remembered as well. This is a divide, so it's not...
Every side of this is deeply subjective.
Yeah, exactly.
Every side on this believes they're right, and every side on it is within their rights to believe that they're right.
Exactly, but I think just because the people who have appeared on camera or on air crying doesn't mean that the other people aren't just as equally upset, or that the fallout for their mental health or that their ability to function in their day-to-day lives hasn't been impacted by this either, because I'm sure it has. So that's not a way to win a battle. That's the PR side of it.
Yeah, it's what Dennis writes about here in the battle for control of the message. Contradictory versions of events have emerged. The players' meeting that took place after Mayo lost the Connacht final to Galway is one case in point. The players claim that 20 members of the panel attended the meeting, in the course of which a player who remained with the team afterwards raised the possibility of a heave against Leahy. It's basically all about controlling the message. He mentions it in the opening paragraph of his piece as well, does Dennis in the Sunday Times today. That's ultimately, I know my view on this doesn't matter, where I kind of have an issue with it is that this entire thing is being played out in the media in a way that most GAA stories, like people glommed onto the Cork story.
Richie. It is all our fault. Before. It's all, there's a line there again, Dennis says, talking about, I think from Denise McDonough, who selector walked away, like the elephant in the room is the absence of communication, transparency. You talk about communication, what Cora Staunton said in that interview on News Talk, about using the word unsafe and unhealthy, they're
loaded terms.
Loaded terms, but they're serious terms, and you're looking at, it invokes that conversation about libel. So in terms of communication, that obviously triggered another set of events with Peter Lee going on with Woolley and giving his side, which prompted the big statement. So that took it to another level. And again, my point was, did nobody learn the lessons of previous rows that going on radio and you throwing around terms like that has clearly just brought this to another
I think in a weird way
level.
People actually have learned from previous instances like this, like the Cork one, and it seems as if they've on each side chosen the mediums through whom they want to speak. We've seen Leahy doing his own podcast. Then his statement, which was just released on Thursday, wasn't it? And it was only released to the 42.ie. We previously had Cora speaking to ourselves, and members of the Mayo side speaking to ourselves. It's just, and the fact that the press conference took place in front of 2 journalists.
Yeah,
that's not usually how, to my estimation, press conferences go.
It's not.
That's the definition of controlling the messages.
Yeah, it's not. It's not usually how it works. But this isn't a usual situation. I think one of the things that we have to remember in this is that in every team there is friction. Like in every single team, you're talking about a panel of players of 30 people, all from different clubs, all different age groups, all with different experience levels. Everyone has to be managed a little bit differently. So if you put this kind of media microscope on any team, you will get people with grievances. A lot of people go home from training. You're not going to have 30 women or men leave a training ground and have the exact same experience of what just happened in the previous hour and a half. Especially things, and I think this is what some of the statements about it not being about player selection, I don't think it's completely about player selection, but player selection is one of the biggest things that happens when you're an inter-county player. So if you're getting selected or you're not getting selected, or the line that you're selected on is different to what you're used to, or you're being asked to play a different role than what you think is your best role. All of that adds to whether you have grievances, whether you feel like the entire setup is going a little bit wrong for you. So I think all of that is normal in setups, and actually having this publicly. Usually what happens if there's unhappiness with the manager, to the extent that these 12 players say, the manager usually goes. The fact that hasn't happened in this...
This used to happen at inter-county in the men's game all the time.
Yeah.
So like 10 years ago, and what the GPA, the huge success of the GPA in my eyes, has taken all the disharmony, which is, you could pick 5 different counties now. It could tell you the rows that are going on, but don't become public, because they've kind of got a system where it's a bloodless coup. So they know the GPA are there, the reps are in, they know the problems, and you almost have a system now where they're taking huge money off the GAA and the government. You're 18.6 million deal over 3 years. There's big things at stake that they can't afford to go through the public bloodletting. So the success of GPA is to take all the rows that we went through. Every winter was a public coup in various counties, and you can list them off. Whereas that process now, even though the same rows are going on, they're just dealt in a very different way. And my point was that the Women's Gaelic Ladies Association should learn the lessons of how the GPA have kind of quietly stilled all those or taken them out of the public arena. So again, they're only a formative organisation, but that process, I think the same rows are going on in the men's, but they're just handled now. You know, there's different issues at stake and stakeholders.
I think the age of the GPA, or WGPA, pardon me, it shouldn't come into effect here at all. It's the fact that they're there in the first place. They're there to deal and mediate in these types of scenarios, and it seems to me that they just haven't really done that adequate job.
Yeah, well, this blew up like on a national level before. Like when you look back and they talked about, okay, there were some meetings and there was some disquiet, but there didn't seem to be any effort to kind of handle this divide that must have been quite obvious. I think we've all seen the clip of the free, Colin Parkinson tweeted it during the week of Sarah Rowe was obviously thought she was taking frees on a match, and Cora Staunton was of the belief that she was taking free, and there was words exchanged between the pair. Like that's a symbol that something's happening, that you need to take that in control. And as you said, that can be the management, that can be the board, that can be the WGPA, but it needs to be done in quiet and away from cameras and microphones. And so I think that's the first problem, and then obviously the second problem is the language used. And when you are about to go public with a fight, that is like, you media manage any statements to within, and I think everyone knows that. You don't need to be a communications expert to know that. So you know, and the girls admitted themselves on the Monday at the press conference, they knew the language they were using, and they said they still felt it was appropriate. Now, I think when you look back at the grievances they had, I think people have different subjective views on whether they're legit grievances or not in terms of, you know, creating this furore. I think nobody can say that they were justified in using the words unsafe or alluding to sensitive and personal issues.
But there is the crossover, like we're talking about handling the message, like Jackie Hurley from RTE, who, you know, knows reporting and communicating inside out. You know, she was obviously one of the two invited journalists. I was at the launch of the women's GPA, where she was one of the central speakers. So, she, you know,
she's got background in the game.
Yeah, she's got background. She's clearly a part of that. So the link to me is, you know, there are people there who are clearly invested in the overall players' bodies. So, but they wanted to get a message out that was clearly one-sided. So what, you know, where's the next statement going to come from the disaffected or from the 2060 state? Like, is this what we're going to get if you have an hour's video?
If you were invited to a press conference and you turned up and it was just, say, yourself and maybe Dermot Crowe sitting there in the front row, and that was it, how would you feel if, like, with such a story that is as big as this in GA terms? If it was just two journalists there, clearly you'd be delighted on one hand because you've got the scoop, but on the other, is there a little bit of unease?
There's nothing worse than a journalist scorned, you know, Sinead, in any way. And by excluding, I know clearly now they wanted to handle the message in a very certain way, but that left itself open to so many questions about. There was nobody in the room who was off message. That, well, what about the hard questions about the use of certain words and all? So again, like, you're leaving yourself open there for all sorts of questions, and you can see other people obviously weighing in now. Who didn't get an invite and who weren't part of it.
Who are keeping the story going.
Keeping the story going, but that's what the story's asking the valid questions that weren't clearly maybe asked as well.
We're trying to ask questions. I think that the aspect of picking sides, I think people should, especially if they're not involved in the situation, steer where.
We just don't know enough.
Because we don't know enough.
Yeah.
Exactly, there isn't enough information out there, and unfortunately we're left with pieces wondering why others haven't gotten involved sooner. A fantastic piece should mention as well, Dermot Crowe in the Sunday Independent Sports section today. We were moving from one unseemly aspect of the GA to another, and the fallout from the series of events that basically came around in the club game in Tyrone last week, the discussions have been ongoing surrounding that since, and Dermot points to an instance that I know I was unaware of up until now, and seems the larger populace was unaware of this one because it wasn't spoken about in the last 41 years, or even at the time. The opening paragraph is a quote from the Ulster Herald from Saturday, August 13th, 1977. It reads, "The tragic death of Derryloughlin clubman Paddy Hughes as a result of injuries received in a fracas at a Clark Club semi-final in Cookstown last week cast a gloom over the Tyrone GAA scene, and as a mark of respect there was a complete cancellation of last Sunday's league and championship programme. The funeral from hospital to the family home on Sunday night and from the home to Mountjoy Church on Monday morning was one of the biggest ever in the area, and among those in attendance on both occasions were County Chairman Pat McCartan and Secretary Dermot Conway. It will take some time for the shockwaves caused by such a happening to subside." Dermot Crowe tracks down Pat McCartan, the county chairman at that time, who's fit and healthy, he says, and in his early 80s, but with great recollection of this particular instance. And what's most remarkable about it especially given the events that have gone on up in Tyrone the last 2 weeks, and I suppose your own paper, Philip, traces them back even further than that, and as does Dermot's piece as well. This is actually the first time that Pat McCartan has been asked by a journalist about that chapter of Tyrone GAA's layered history. Accounts of indiscipline far less grave are now broadcast immediately on social media and analysed in minute detail. McCartan was a young club chairman, although he'd been an active board member since the early 70s. I was unaware of this, and I imagine most people reading it today will have been unaware of it. The death of a fan at a club game in 1977 up in Tyrone. But you hate that term, puts everything into perspective, ... but
it's a remarkable piece, like staggering story. And when Dermot, the details, followers scaled a wire fence to get on the field near the end of the game, and during this period Hughes received serious injuries. He died the following Saturday in a hospital in Belfast, leaving behind a wife and young family. That is just...
And it was a minor game. It was at a minor game.
So to put into the context of obviously what the follow-on from Sean Kavanagh, the photo he put up, and the various row that happened that weekend, like the detail again, Dermot talks about Pat McCartan and another official going to the wake. So the two of us went to the wake very timidly, not knowing how we were going to be received. Like imagine
the weight on Pat McCartan's shoulders going to that.
Yeah, so it's incredible. So, and it says, as it turned out, this man's brother-in-law, Paddy Quinn, played football for Tyrone. At no stage did anybody blame the county board or have a go or anything. So, like to paint that picture of a county board chairman having to go to a wake of an incident where clearly people have jumped over the fence and weighed in. It's an incredible story, and like. Again, Mayo Clifford in our paper had detailed the 10 instances, say in Tyrone, which 10 unsavoury incidents.
Fair play to him for just getting 10.
Yeah, we had this conversation during the week, and he said he could have kept going, but it was in reaction to Peter Canavan's comment saying that look, there's an agenda out there.
On here as well again.
Yeah, it's all your fault.
Off the ball, setting the agenda.
Oh God.
But the agenda, like clearly. Part of Dermot's piece as well is documenting some of the very same incidents, and they're all there. There's, you can't. It's very hard to argue an agenda, but this piece, that story is incredible. Kind of warning of, I suppose, where the GA should have gone and maybe didn't.
Yeah. I think it reminded me a bit about the kind of the rugby conversation that's happening now about people saying, it's gone too PC, and that's all part of it. And I think even the words, going back to language as well, like fracas and melees and schmozzle as like really kind of making it sound like a heartwarming part of the game, a part of the game that we love, that we don't want to disappear. And Dermot kind of brings this piece right to today. Obviously he starts in 77, and he says and it can get to the staggering stage where someone actually dies. Not that it should be required for players, mentors and followers to show a bit of sportsmanship and restraint and a shred of human decency. He goes back to a letter in September 1977 to the Strabane Chronicle, which said it expressed deep distress that such a climate should exist where a man can be kicked to death during an underage game between teams from neighbouring parishes. That is where violence can take us unless we all catch a grip. And I think that's what the GA needs to look at, and Dermot outlines how a lot of the infractions just led to fines instead of suspension of players and suspension of clubs.
The catalogue, like again, Micheál talks about his number one was from 2011. Again, league final Carrickmore and Dromore, which left one Carrickmore supporter rushed to hospital, get part of his ear reattached. Like, from Dermot from 77, August 13, 1977 to November 13, 2011, is this how the GA has evolved? And I was saying to you earlier, I think the one thing that'll probably solve the GA's problems of violence on the field is social media now, because everything is documented. And the idea of Pat McCartan talking about how he hadn't received a phone call on this incidents where a life had been lost, we're saying that the row obviously became public knowledge as soon as it went into the social media domain. Yeah,
the social media aspect of it is actually one of those rare social media positives whereby these things get highlighted, and a lot of people want to pass these things off as normal and part of the game, and it's just tensions boiling over. It's I'd be very uncomfortable with 30 odd people laying into one another, and we've seen obviously with this Paddy Hughes case that's highlighted here from 77, somebody gets hit the wrong way in an instance like that, and you could be in very grave trouble.
That's always my fear as well, because you're talking about big men as well. These are lads who are in like the new gym age of GA footballers. They're all, and hurlers, they're all big lads, so one punch can do a huge, like, it can cause death.
They're far bigger. I remember watching that I can't remember the name of the show, but it's basically where they swapped professions and
Toughest Trade.
That's the one, where a GA player would go over and play with like a soccer club and a soccer
Aaron
player.
Kernan did the soccer.
Aaron Kernan did the soccer over at Sunderland, and I remember seeing Kernan in the gym at Sunderland. And Aaron Kernan, like by GA standards, wouldn't necessarily be the biggest of lads, but I saw him surrounded by these guys. I think he was training with the under-21s or under-23 squad at the time of Sunderland. And he looked like a freak compared to the rest of them. They're all these elfin, slim, just really well toned and really well, measured guys. But Kernan just looked like a beast compared to them.
Amateur.
But he's amateur. But like you can imagine, well, we're not saying that Aaron Kernan's going around poking digs at anybody in Sunderland training, but there is an issue there. The physicality involved in it could cause great danger. Even the instance involving Sean Kavanagh there, which we know now is as a result, they say, of an accidental coming together, and the CCC up in Tyrone are going to take no further action on that instance, at least. Like, still, a heavy brute of a lad sliding in, catching somebody inside the head with his knee can cause them toll damage.
And we don't want to be too hyperbolic about it. It's not like every single GA match is, being reduced to this stuff, but I think there's no point in doing what Canavan did during the week and saying like Tyrone are being targeted in its agenda and there's no truth to it. You kind of have to own when there is a problem, so that you don't have to have these massive exaggerations to actually get attention to it. Just say, okay, hands up, there's stuff happening here. How do we nip it in the bud? How will it not get any worse? And the worst thing you can do is deny that there's any problem.
Well, there's the nice contrast, like Sean McGoldrick has a piece, ignore all the GA naysayers, game is in better shape than ever, which is an argument obviously about, so it's unrelated to obviously just the row, but I suppose, it's the controversy incidents. The championship is over now, so this is what we're going to be talking about from now till January when the league starts.
The unfortunate thing is, like, the juicy story is not by how much Moy and Eden Dork would have duked it out for in terms of points, but rather the cards. Like that, it's that après match line where you think of, was it Richard Cooper? He's going through the results from Northern Ireland and he's like, Tyrone 23 digs, no suspension, 14 attendance off. That's what we're levelled at now when we get to club football reports from across the winter, is that they seem like the juicier story rather than who's actually progressing through the championship. And again, that comes back to the issue around the Mayo ladies situation, is that all came in the week after Dublin won the All-Ireland, and that should have been the focus of last week.
It would have been much better if we'd had a great game on Sunday that people couldn't stop talking about, or that there was, some superstar performance from one of the women. And obviously that's not how minority sport works, and obviously we're not a minority sport in terms of player numbers, but we are in terms of coverage. So that's what happens, unfortunately. You only get the headlines when
actually we had 50,000, a record crowd at the ladies football final, and yet the week's coverage of ladies football from that moment almost on Monday has been the Mayo ladies rows taken over, which is so unfortunate. Like, obviously Dublin, Cork, a huge battle, Dublin go on and win, and yet the week is taken up. The following week's result, there's no reflection, I think, on the Dublin ladies football achievement.
No, not at all.
So again, my bigger point is there is a broader thing. If 50,000 was a record crowd, it sends out a huge statement about ladies football and all the good work. So I think this is where the WGPA, and they have to get involved and say, look, there is the bigger picture. If we're going to protect the image of the game, that what's the fallout that Dublin ladies football achievement has been lost.
Yeah, and there is big sponsorship in the women's game as well, so you'd imagine they'll have something to say, Gigi Caher and Little will have something to say at some point if it does roll on, because as you said, it was a huge distraction. Now, generally after the ladies football, no matter how many people are there, we've always had huge crowds. The coverage does die out on the Monday. The interest isn't there from media.
The following Sunday, you get a follow-up piece. I'm sure there's a very good story there to be told if needed, but the chance of it being told will reduce to zero.
Diminished, yeah.
The concentration seems to be, and we saw them, I think it was Alban Kerry's piece with Marie Crowe last week, whereby there's loads of brilliant backstories, but they use them to generate the interest, to get the people through the gate, so necessarily the stories to tell afterwards aren't always there, or the appetite to tell them anyways.
Well, I think one of the things is that there's a huge expectation, because it's there's not 50,000 at the games on the way up, or the television coverage, people aren't tuning in as much, so there's a huge expectation for the game to be absolutely brilliant, and generally that doesn't happen in finals. So when it doesn't,
any kind of
any match of any code in any sport, so when that doesn't happen, then, and as you said, the stories have been told beforehand.
Last year's All-Ireland football final was one of the greatest finals, Mayo in Dublin.
There is a point to be made there, but just generally the point holds that finals are usually tense. Kind of.
And when you're talking about in the women's game, it's the first time that they'll play in Croke Park for the year. Sometimes it's the first time they've ever played there. So there's, there's pressures there that aren't borne in the same way as in the men's game. So often they aren't the best match. Sometimes they are. Sometimes we do. But like the pressure and the expectation is there for, God, is the sport good enough to? And you have all those naysayers who will say, well, there's no point in giving money to women's sport because they're not good enough. La la la. So there is extra pressure on that day.
I suppose the other big story of the week, the ESRI. I know. You talk, Richie, but linked into where the game is going, if the ladies' game continues in the same development, like are we going to get an ESRI report into? I presume the commitment is huge in many cases,
same,
but like there's plenty talking. Colin O'Rourke mentions again where the GA needs to go. Michael Dignan in our paper saying the GA is at a crossroads now, and it's a drum he's been banging for a long time now that something needs to happen severely to redress the balance between club and county. But that whole argument is feeding in about where, the high level that we're seeing across the codes and records being made in terms of attendances or standards in ladies and the men's game. But where are we on the road to semi-professionalism?
Yeah, O'Rourke writes in here, there's an almost unanimous agreement in GEA that the loading of games and training for young players particularly is harmful, that the earliest months of the year is the biggest concern. If this report, the SRI one, is to be taken seriously, then every county should be appointing a player welfare officer whose role will be to monitor the frequency and load of training and matches with different teams and have the power to intervene and say no to some or all of the managers that the player is involved with. That's the key there. I mean, the appointing of a player welfare officer is all well and good. The fact that if you're in, say, Tyrone and you'd go to Mickey Hart, this player is playing too many games, he's not likely, but he'd be within his rights as county manager to say, F off, I need him for this match.
And I think everyone is going to be selfish in those situations. Like if you're the college manager and you want to go on to win the Sigerson or whatever, that's your priority, so you're going to want them for those games. Club managers will want their county players for as much of the year as they can, especially if there's a few players and it really depletes training numbers. I think one of the things, and I think it was in the Sunday Times as well, is inter-county players do put county first. There's a lot of talk about club first, but inter-county players generally, elite sports people will tackle the elite
I think it was something
game.
Like 83% they asked about county players. Would you like to decrease your county commitments depending on, and give more time to club? And Seamus Hickey had to answer. He said maybe it was seasonal, maybe they were asked during championship, but it was a huge majority saying nope.
No, of course, because they're elite. They want to be playing at the elite level, and club matches don't do that. No matter what county you're in, even if you're playing kind of in a stronger county, that the club game doesn't do that for you. And I think that's one of the things. I think obviously this will be difficult for smaller clubs or for clubs who have a high participation rate of players on the county team, but I do think clubs will have to get used to just not having their county players and play the championship away without county players until maybe the business end.
For a two-tier divide, county players.
Well, if it means that, I think the main thing that club players want is to know when their games are, because you're not playing at the elite level. You want to know when your matches are, and that they're going to be reasonably around the same time, and that you're not going to be playing like the Dublin ladies started their championship, the Dublin Camogie started their championship a week ago. But
if you divorce club players from county, well then you're only heading towards semi-professionalism, because you've nothing to keep it amateur.
But there's only a few teams going to be playing at that end of the competition, so maybe you're creating that divide more. But I do think if you're going to stop players from burning out, if you're going to stop that overwork, then there has to be an acknowledgement that playing club and county at the same time is almost impossible.
31 hours is a hell of a lot. Like as Rourke points out, there's more people spending time with their county side than there will be their family if their numbers in this are to be believed. I mean even Mike Fennelly was in here on Wednesday talking about it, and he was saying the devotion that you have to give over to the county setup is just incredible.
I was actually talking to him. He was doing a gig during the week as well, and Fennelly was really interested. He said it's time to pay managers. He said this ESRI report lists 31 hours, and he says, well, What happens if you're a manager, which clearly everybody accepts, and Derek McGrath took time out from De La Salle College, that it's probably 50 hours, could be double. So
they're usually paid though.
some of them might be getting, but he's saying make it official. So the difference being that whatever under the counter, wherever things are filtering into various people around the country, but that make it official. So if players are putting in 31 hours and the manager are putting in double, which is effectively a full-time job, and make it official. And I was actually at a piece with Eddie Brennan on Sunday. He's taken over his leash, and I was asking him the same question. Do you agree with Mike Fennelly? He's taken over his leash, senior manager.
Getting paid?
Well, I said to him, would you like a full-time, should managers be paid full-time? He said, look, it's effectively a full-time job. So he's a guard instructor, but he has his own job. So he's a guard instructor in the Garda College. And he says he'd be in charge for the Joe McDonagh Cup for the couple of weeks of the peak time that I'll be on. He says he's looking at leave or time off. So that to manage a county in the second tier competition, a guy with a full-time job has to take time off that he's already looking at his diary and saying, I don't know whether to block book a week or two, just to manage a county team for those periods. So again, go up to Lee McCarthy's and the Derek McGrath's, Jack O'Connor's, there's time off left, right and centre. So
county players at a certain level as well would have jobs that would be, at a certain level, I'd say, would have jobs that are maybe more amenable to playing county GA. But I think then if you get into the situation whereby you're codifying managers being played, that's not long before players start knocking on the door and go, if...
Once it's official managers are being played, then how do you have players?
How do you say no?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. Once there's any official pay scale, I think then the players will go, well,
but say, where
are you without me?
If inter-county managers are doing, if the role involves 50 to 60 hours a week, so where are we going next? How do you, that is a full-time job by anyone's definition.
Yeah, but they are mostly paid. It might be under the counter stuff, but I don't think there's many managers out there taking county teams now for the good of their health and heart. I don't think that happens. I think anyone listening would think we're very naive if we think that's how it works.
But if that's the case, so there's obviously a full-time job there, whether there's any recompense involved or not. So where the next study is, it's only going one way.
Even club managers get paid now in most places. Yeah.
So, but what are the GA going to do at some stage? Do you not, if the players are saying, we want to stay amateur, but it's a full-time job, do you not just cut the inter-county time back? You get rid of all the subsidiary competitions, get rid of all the overlapping competitions and just cut it back. So then it's not a thing where you need a counselling service as part of the GPA. If the demands are reduced to the extent where the hours are cut, surely that solves all the problems.
But that's the opposite of what inter-county players want. They want more games and more competition, and that's why we're getting the Super 8s and the round robins in
But
Munster.
Ultimately, if you follow their logic, you're heading for semi-professionalism.
I think just for the non-GA people listening and probably rolling their eyes at us, Colin O'Rourke does mention in his piece there are plenty of other sports people who make just as many sacrifices as Gaelic footballers and hurlers, but are rarely mentioned. So the GA is not unique, and the issues are the same for all sports people. And that, most elite sports people in Ireland, they might be on grants, but there'd be very few people on full, say, Olympic 40,000 grants. Most of them would be on 20. All of that would go on their sport, and they're working full time. You saw the hockey teams, the hockey team over the summer. Most of them working full time. A few of them obviously have got contracts now to play abroad, but they have to move abroad.
The Dominant brothers from Skibbereen, as David Sweeney details. So I'm sure if the ESRI wanted to include the O'Donovans into any study, I'm sure that would be eye-opening.
Reading about them last week and the time spent down in Australia and New Zealand in terms of trying to get their training together as they gear towards that World Championship goal last week. Great piece by Eamon Sweeney on the back page of the Sunday Independent today, saying there's never been a year like it for a variety of sporting success. Last week it was the turn of rowers Dominant Puspur and the O'Donovan brothers, Dominant and Dominant Junior, along with the 3-day eventing team of Dominant McCarthy, Dominant Ennis, Dominant Watson and Dominant Daniels. With so many medalists to keep track of, no wonder Shane Ross is confused when he hears Dominic Casey is the rowing coach. He'll surely ask his minions to double check the name. Last week really brought home the year that this has been in terms of Irish sport, and it's something that Sweeney points out here. It's not necessarily what went against their usual pattern by taking our lead, blah blah blah. Said he's basically talking about it's not necessarily steeped in the same nationalism that other sports are, and people might kind of cynically point towards the fact that it hasn't grasped, or these sports don't necessarily grasp the national attention the way the football and rugby sides do. But on the other side of it, they're out there putting in the hours for themselves more than anything else.
Yeah, and for Skibbereen, I think.
For Skib,
he talks a lot about Skibbereen. I actually interviewed the O'Donovan brothers during the week for The Last Word on Today FM, and I was...
Hell of a plug there, Sinead.
There we go. But I was really taken aback. I did have a point, Richie. I was taken aback by how different they were, say, from 2 years ago, where they were talking about, you just get in the boat and go from A to B as fast as you can. And obviously that was never the case, and there was always, there's more tactics to rowing than that. But they were wanted to talk more about the precision of the sport, and Gary was going through how they were in the first quarter of that race wanted to do 129 and then 131, then 131 and then 131, and they did it to that precision that they were down to the exact same, the last 3 quarters of the race they did in the exact same time that they wanted to. And for a 2-person, that's precision if it's just 1 person in a boat. And they were talking about, like Paul said, that if Gary drops by 2%, he can kind of tell, and he knows what to do when that couple of percent drops from his so it is brilliant to see them kind of grow up, and I do think that they have captured, like, everybody knows the brothers, and the problem is that we just don't see the sport enough, and we don't understand the sport enough that we can follow it in the same way that you follow
to be fair, their success has led to further events being televised. Like, there are different regattas that they'll actually head to now and actually televised, and they did the same last week in Plovdiv at the Worlds.
It's interesting that they don't have a sponsor. Eamon Sweeney mentioned that at the end of that piece, that they actually don't have a major sponsor at the moment,
which is crazy. And when we see last week the piece that was in the Sunday Times that mentioned the disparity in funding requests and the funding that was actually given to rowing and to other sports, like, they were looking for 175,000 in capital grants and received only 90. And 90 across the entirety of Irish rowing.
That's a lot of boats for,
it's boats and traders, as Noel Kelly pointed out here last week. It's all they're really looking for, and they're not necessarily being given that by the people in charge of the purse strings.
There's a great line in it, Eamon, saying, he talks about, it's a source of some amusement to me that in The Social Network, as hip and intelligent movie as there's been the last decade, the alpha male status of the Winklevoss brothers as top dogs in Harvard is symbolised by their rowing prowess. The Winkelvy finished 6th in the Olympics. Gary and Paul finished 2nd. The line he finished with is, Harvard is grand, but it's no Skibbereen.
They've made Skibbereen cool. The lads have made Skib cool, is what Sweeney says here. His daughter went to Irish college, and for the first couple of weeks, every time she told someone where she came from, they'd mention the O'Donovans and how much they admire them. The lads have made Skib cool. It is, as Eamon points out, saying, I'm not a great fan of nationalism because I know the damage caused by the creed's more virulent political manifestations. Sporting nationalism, on the other hand, seems largely benign when applied to those sports which don't attract huge crowds. Victory in rowing and eventing don't engender a flag-waving orgy of national self-congratulation. Instead, there's something more organic, a quiet pride in the achievements you identify with, because you know where they're coming from. And as he points out, the different points of the country that the eventing team who saw success in North Carolina last week, coming from the likes of Carroll and Meath and Tipperary, these successes are plotted throughout the country now. It's actually just a really heartening thing to see. Sinead Paspora coming to Cork via Latvia. It's remarkable stuff. And we go back to the Reece McClenachans, the Irish women's hockey side. I mean, on and on this year has actually been really good for the soul in terms of Irish sport on the international stage. Yeah,
and you would hope that there are clever decisions made with funding and money. I always kind of find our funding system quite unusual, that you have to place first to fourth to get the top funding, say for Olympic grants, whereas that you're not catching the people then when you need them. You're catching them when they've already placed, when they're already doing well. Was why not find them when they're younger, when they have the prospect of doing it, and that's when you should be feeding them with, like, look at Reece McClenaghan. He was able to do that, like, win gold at the European Championships with it. Like, he didn't have a gym for the entire summer. He had to move out of the gym because the gym closed down their high performance unit. So he was at his back garden doing some of his trainings. So it doesn't really make sense to have to wait for him to place to be able to give him the money, whereas you know the prospect is there and the ability is there. Why not pump the money in at that point when it's really needed? And also to keep going back to the GAO report, like, people get disillusioned, or that they have to, like, go back to real life, so they stop. Is there people out there who are making these decisions about whether to continue going with, say, these minority sports? And that's when you need the money and the funding to be there, not after the success has come.
Not be facetious, but if the ESRI, has anybody put a time on the a study of the time the O'Donovans put in and documented. Surely that would give an insight into
What would it take to be at that level?
Yeah, and then how does that compare? Like, obviously everybody's fighting for grant resources now, including the GA players and the O'Donovans. So I'm sure that would be eye-opening in terms of their commitment and maybe what they get back or don't get back out of it. So if you were picking your prime Olympic sport, surely that would at least give some element of a guide to who justifies what in terms of a pot, or do they justify anything? And just in terms of the Olympic arena, which was said, there's a very interesting story Sean McGoldrick has in the Sunday World where the headline is "Boxing may lose Olympic status." So if we're talking about obviously boxing and
I don't know, after 2 years ago I think we might be all right on that front.
yeah, but the idea that boxing might be gone from the next Olympics, Tokyo 2020, is one that would obviously send shivers down the spine
of anyone.
It's
unthinkable
from Ireland's point of view, given where boxing is. And Sean kind of details saying there's a key election coming up, and it centres around following the sports world governing body. It's at the moment, after an internal revolt, the main position is being held on an interim basis by the Gafur Rakimov, a controversial figure with links to organised crime in Central Asia, which he denies, and saying that if he becomes president, well then the president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, has warned that Rakimov's election as president could put boxing's place at Tokyo in jeopardy. So that is certainly something that would have severe implications for Ireland if it reaches that crisis stage.
Considering we're already in that cycle, we're very much in the 2020 Olympic cycle.
The IOC would have some cheek to remove boxing from the 2020 Olympic Games when you consider what's gone on with WADA, etc. this week and their reinstatement and the road that's ultimately going to lead down to, which is guys competing for Russia, I suppose, at the boxing and other events in Tokyo in 2 years' time. It would be quite remarkable that they take issue with the head of AIBA, as dodgy as he might be, being the reason to remove boxing from the Olympic Games, with all of its history as well that goes before it too. But it's not the first sport, I suppose, to fall out of favour in that regard. I mean, they have decided to have sports in and out. I know Olympic wrestling was in trouble a couple of years ago in terms of whether or not it was going to get recognition and whether it was going to be allowed.
Surfing's back in as well. That's gone in and out, hasn't it, surfing?
Have you got any surfers?
I don't know.
Tokyo beaches, here we come in 2 years' time. Speaking of looking ahead to the future, even thinking about this just seems wrong, and I think it's something that Tommy Conlon points out as well. Paul Rowan's writing about it in Sunday Times, but for Conlon's piece is a more wry look, let's say, at Ireland
very enjoyable,
potentially hosting the 2030 at least in part World Cup. There is, as Tommy points out, something just bizarre about trying to think ahead to something as remote as 2030. There has to be some degree of forethought in human affairs, both great and small, but drawing up plans for 2030 seems to reek of hubris in the face of all those manifold uncertainties which daily assail our petrified grip on this orphan ball of rock we call ours. It gets to a stage where one is almost reluctant to do a week's shopping in advance for fear of taking things for granted unduly. Like, that's the thing, when this feasibility study line came in, and literally it was just 2 lines from the FAI during the week, saying that they were looking into the possibility of holding talks about maybe seeing if they can possibly host part of the 2030 World Cup. Everybody's eyes rolled because they went, the FAI at the World Cup. There's absolutely no chance that's going to happen. And the more you read about it, the more you kind of go, I kind of see how this might happen. This is not beyond the realms of possibility. But yeah, Tommy's having a bit of a look at this one and the role that Sepp Blatter seemingly has played in this one as well, Philip.
It's great, that line about the week shopping. We're looking to do a week shopping in advance, brilliant. But he kind of details Sepp's part in it all. And I think there's a quote here.
Yeah, Blatter is 82, but no doubt already thinking about the 7-star hotel suite that will pamper his aged arse when he fetches up for the opening ceremony at the age of 94. At this point, and this point only, we must concede to him a grudging measure of respect for his optimism, albeit that consummate geronocrats such as he are sustained by enormous quantities of self-delusion in the first place. He probably thinks he's going to live forever. And you know what? I wouldn't put it past him.
I think he will definitely be there at age 94, wherever it is.
100%.
South America,
it sounds like
Dublin.
It sounds like his idea, you know. So it says he publicly floated the idea. So he says they talking about England and the World Cup. They had it in 1966, a long time ago. I spoke with one of your colleagues. He said if Wales and Scotland joined together, and I said, why not Ireland?
Brilliant.
All of Ireland together. So he already sees us in a unified Ireland at that stage, which is probably going to happen after Brexit anyway.
John Delaney's ears pricked up at that stage.
So basically Sepp has put us as part of the World Cup. Fair play to him.
But I think that's probably coming from maybe a lack of knowledge on the political situation, but like as you said,
stopped him before.
Yeah, as you said, like 2030, like you'd imagine, will Scotland have its independence? Will we be united Ireland? There'll be a much different, I think.
Brexit means Brexit, Sinead.
Yeah.
Well, we know.
Yeah, that's it at a time where, you know, England are obviously in negotiations to try and divorce themselves from us. Here we are in the sporting thing. Now we're all in this together. And it's interesting as well, the list of stadia listed underneath.
I'm excited
Tommy's
now
piece.
after reading this. Yeah,
Colin Young goes through, and Croke Park is there, the Aviva, Windsor Park is there, but
Windsor Park won't be able to host anything.
No.
So
I think the GA will be rubbing their hands at this one, because Casement Park has obviously been sitting idle, and if this happens, then money has to come from somewhere to make sure that Casement Park can actually hold 50,000 people.
Yeah, and this week is the Lee Miller.
Yeah.
So
Tuesday.
given mentioned Sporting Stadia and Ireland joining the dots, you know, with Sepp and co, given the fuss over Lee Miller, so I think, is it Colin Young or Paul Rowan, somebody floated the idea of Porky Queeve.
It's in there, yeah.
I think why people are, like you said, Richie, are kind of going, oh, maybe. Obviously, we got burnt with the rugby bid, and people felt
time, yeah.
yeah, understatement, Sinead. But people,
where next to go? You've lost a middleweight fight. Where do you want to go next? Oh, we'll go for a heavyweight one.
Yeah, but I think people are like, the embarrassment will be England's if this doesn't happen.
Because they're doing all the heavy lifting, and we can just distance ourselves.
Yeah, we can just go. Yeah, you
is
can.
That part
it's
of the motivation then for Ireland to get behind it.
You can borrow Croke Park, you can borrow the Aviva, and you can build us Casement Park there. And then if it doesn't work out, God, the English got it wrong again.
The idea, it's just, the more you read about it, it doesn't seem like, when you see quotes from Alexander Cheferin, who's the head of UEFA, basically pointing out that if there is going to be a bid from United Islands, essentially, of like England, Scotland, Wales and the Ireland, that he wouldn't want basically infighting in UEFA. So this would have the green light of UEFA to go forward as its bid, and that would follow on from a similar scenario where everybody kind of agreed that US, Canada and Mexico would be together for 2026, and that there'd be no real challenge to that one, but Morocco put their hands up. We're like, oh, we want to have a go. They were never going to be in the running for it, and the US, or sorry, the North American bid won handsomely. This seems to be going up against the fact that by the time 2030 comes around, 2022 will have been in Qatar, 26 will have been in the Americas. So it would have been time for a European one.
It's Europe's turn again, because it was 2018.
See, the more you think about it, you're like, this is...
But then it is also South America's turn. It's the 100 years since Uruguay held it first. They have their joint bid, so they have, you know, the 3-country bid as well. So I think that's probably...
What's romance got to do with it?
Biggest rival. Oh, yeah.
We're getting the World Cup in 2030.
Yeah, the headline on Paul Rowan's piece is British and Irish World Cup bid is realistic. So, like, Paul is kind of... He's documenting how this might actually not be a crazy idea, which is scary in itself.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah, well, they say England are capable of doing it by themselves. And
of course, they bleeding are, yeah.
Yeah, so, and they're, you know, hitching the rest of us on to make it more attractive.
I missed Sean Kelly's line. Do you see that, Sinead? The suggestion by MEP Sean Kelly, the Croke Park would make a better venue for the final than Wembley.
He's dead right, Sean. You're dead right.
UEFA General Secretary John Delaney in 2030 might be in a position to make that happen. You never know. But the Casement Park issue is raised in both pieces and in Colin Young's as well. You don't know if like a successful World Cup bid would speed up that process. I know Northern Ireland probably needs a government first before it gets another stadium. It's probably their main concern at the moment. It's dilapidated and closed since 2013 and is essentially an overgrown meadow surrounded by crumbling old terracing, writes Paul in the Sunday Times. Like, the impetus to get that done would be huge, but then again, yeah, all the South American bid would have to do is hold up a picture of Casement Park and go, look, they promised this for 2023. There still hasn't been a spade in the ground. They haven't even weeded the gaff. Why should they
and they
get
don't
a
have a
World Cup
government. Hopefully we'll have a government up there at some point.
So maybe the World Cup will solve all of Ireland's issues.
Yeah. You have to get your act together because we have to have Northern Ireland in on this bid.
Unified Ireland issues,
What a
Brexit issues.
fantastic idea. It's fantastic. I like the idea of this. Speaking of bringing things together, Europe, we've all got the blue jersey on for next week, Sinead.
Yeah,
the Ryder Cup.
Sky Sports is telling us to believe in blue.
Do you believe in blue?
Well, I laugh at that ad every time it comes on, but yeah, Ryder Cup this week. There's a nice few preview pieces in the Sunday Independent that won't really get you riled up to, you know, get the European flag out. What's the EU flag called? Get it out and like hanging from your front window or anything.
No bunting in the O'Carroll household.
But there is, I noticed some, so this is kind of the first time in a while that most of the Ryder Cups are held on the British Isles, Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland. So we're in Paris this time, and a French European Tour pro, Michael Lorenzo Ferra, Paul Hayward is saying in the Sindo, shocked his country golf administrators when telling the New York Times, golf is not a good thing here. It's for rich people and spoiled kids. Golf is a very private thing for people in France. Private courses for only rich families or rich people. That's it. I thought that was
Just in France.
interesting look, at how maybe the French people are not going to be enamoured by the Ryder Cup. Most of the tickets have been sold to tourists rather than French people, which is different to when it is played in Ireland or Scotland or England.
It's like the version of bringing the World Cup to Qatar. It doesn't really matter about what people care on the ground.
I remember 2006 because I was there at the K Club for a lot of that, and there was a hell of a lot of tourists involved, and a lot of it was surrounding, like even the bus ads, they had a lot of stuff that was geared towards American tourists, and here you're going out to the K Club, and it was packed with them. There was a scattering of people from wider Europe as well, but it is a huge tourist thing. Not that Paris bleeding needs it.
Yeah, I think with the Ryder Cup, I always enjoy watching it. I think it's fun. I think you have to take it for what it is. It's not the be all and end all in any golfer's calendar.
No,
do you kiss the flag rather than the crest? Or
Dermot Gleeson was doing this a couple of weeks ago talking about it, and he was saying that it's not necessarily a reflection of top level golf as it stands at the moment. Like what's going on in Eastlake this weekend is probably more of that. You get a sense of where golf is really at rather than this biennial flag waving experience.
Yeah, Richie, is it not much more fun when everything is so sedate and careful and all the interviews are watched and they lose the run of themselves?
Yeah, they do. I'm just wondering how much of it is put on for the cameras now. I kind of think back, was a couple of years ago with McIlroy and Patrick Reed, and their ongoing fist pumping duel and high fight. That seemed a little bit.
I think some of them are so, like, they've obviously been playing golf since they were very young, and it's a very serious game, and there's a lot of, you have to be a student, and whereas this is the one time that they get to kind of pretend they're footballers or GA players, and they just get to have the crack with teammates.
But it's you always get the vibe that it's so unusual for them that they kind of say, this is amazing having a teammate, you know. So it adds to the whole thing.
And I think they all, even in themselves, Dermot Gleeson in the Sindo was saying that Nick Faldo was saying it's great to have an event that you play from the heart. So he obviously feels that all of that camaraderie and fist pumping and high fiving is that they care so much about it. Whereas Jack Nicklaus said the Ryder Cup is part of the foundation of the game and it doesn't really matter who wins. It's just about goodwill, he was saying. So even within how they act in it, they have a different reading of what it is.
Goodwill, I don't know how much goodwill there's been. I was reading, I think Mal Clerkin had a piece yesterday detailing all the lack of goodwill.
Yeah, he was saying that. He was saying he hopes it's not losing the reason for its existence was the goodwill, and it seems to be going. I remember, I don't know if you remember Richie from being at the Olympics, Padraig Harrington talking after his first outing, and he was just overcome with joy with being there, and he just loved the idea of participating in an Irish team. He loved that he was around with the men's hockey team, and he was learning a lot from being with individual sports people and teams that were participating under the Irish flag.
He loved it. I remember I spoke to him the day before his first round. He loved it. Seamus Power, who was competing alongside him that week, he was just made, like a lot of people made of the fact that certain golfers didn't want to be there owing to the Zika virus, which we all suffered from.
How is that going for you?
Still working it out 2 years on. But yeah, a lot of people didn't want any part of it because they didn't really see it as an important competition. Ultimately, that's why they weren't there. But the likes of James Power, who got in almost by default, he was beaming the day before going out just to be able to compete from an Irish perspective. And again, this team environment thing is great. I just think golf could probably take a lot from this week coming, and just the Ryder Cup in general, just to be a bit looser, just to unstarch the shirt, like just a little bit, just to show a bit of enjoyment in what you're actually doing rather than this po-faced.
Yeah, and don't give out about people having a drink or, being a bit too loud, just,
But you get this sense that the players love that connection, and when it goes a bit mad, and like see, you talked about McIlroy's duel, that they seem to be in a place that they don't get to normally. So you get a sense that it certainly brings them to different places, and like why not have more of that? Like say,
and it's like it's the fact that it's match play and not necessarily stroke play the whole way around the weekend. Is that you're not concentrating on every shot being minute. You're just concentrating on being better than the other guy.
Yeah.
You want your drive to be longer. You want your putt to be within a
it
certain
invites new fans in as well, and they might not stay, but I think if you're involved in any sport, the idea of more people putting eyes on that sport has to be a good thing. And granted, it is on Sky Sports, so it won't be everybody who will watch it, but it does bring, and I think the match play does help that, because it's much easier to come into a sport and go, okay, this guy has to beat this guy, grant. I can stay interested in that.
But the chemistry side of it, which you don't get, golf's such an individual game, and then you take Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson, who when they were the two best players, you just couldn't put them nearly in a room together, and they just showed you that the team dynamic creates something completely different. So now you're back to a stage where the boys are nearly friends and challenging each other to multi-million duels.
That's all of Woods' creation. He spotted that Mickelson's on the downward slope, and everybody was like, oh, Tiger's on the downward slope as well. And he attached himself to him, and they're on now mates, and now Tiger's on the verge of winning the first PGA Tour event in 5 years.
Yeah, but it'll be fascinating to see, well, who's paired with who.
Yeah, and I think that's why Garcia is there, even though the form's not there. So why would you leave him behind when you're...
He's a good vibes man.
Yeah.
Good vibes man, and also, like, he's one of those players who, like, anything can happen, and that's the kind of stuff you need in championship.
His golfing reputation is built around the Ryder Cup, basically, isn't it?
I wanted to leave the Ryder Cup talk on an up note, and suddenly you've spoiled it. His reputation.
Just in terms
Believe
of golf.
in blue. Go on.
See, everything got a bit of blue on.
Paul Kimmage is an interesting piece, on the golfing team with Robin Dawson, who's saying big things as a pro golfer. So it was just as a kind of balance to the Ryder Cup and the top end of the scale. It was a nice piece just documenting on maybe where this is going to go.
One day it could all be Robins.
Yeah.
Essentially. We'll leave it there. Philip Lanigan, a superb debut, even if you have to miss out on the Unfla's minor match. Without one to remind you. And Sinead Carroll as well, news editor from the journal.ie. That is our pay-per-view for this week. We'll talk to you again next week.